And we're live. Hey, everyone. Welcome to this week on Inside.net. My name is Cecil Phillip. And today we have a very special guest, Mr. Jesse Liberty, who's been in the .NET space for a very long time. He's written tons of books. He's done videos. He's done tons of amazing things to teach folks about building applications with .NET. And so he's had a very long career. And so it's definitely an honor for us to have him here to talk about some of the cool things that he's looking at right now in the .NET space, which happens to be building web APIs with .NET. So before we actually dive right into the topic, Jesse, I really would love for you to just give us just a little bit of a bio, right? Like run through the resume a little bit and let folks know a little bit about who you are and what have you done.
Okay. Let's see. Started programming probably about 30 years ago professionally. Worked in C assembler, then in C, then in C++, and then C# starting in 2000. Most of that time I was independent. I did work for Microsoft for 5-7 years, something like that. And then went independent again. I now work for C&H Industrial. For the past 7 years, I've been working on mobile applications, ending with .NET MAUI. And then I had the opportunity to switch over to writing APIs and backend, which is quite a change for me. So that's exciting. I live with my wife and dog and 2 grown kids who are not living here. And not sure what else to tell you, Cecil. That's me in a nutshell.
Nice. Well, I know you've also written a lot of books. And to be honest with you, like one of your books, Programming C#, I think it's a very long time ago. I read when I was in college, just as I was starting to learn.
You're killing me.
I'm not trying to date anybody. But one of the books that I read when I was in college, when I was just learning about like this .NET thing and what is and what does it do. But you're still writing books, right? And you recently released a book unrelated to web APIs, but you did recently release a book about building applications with MAUI, right? So do you want to tell us a little bit about that before we dive into the web API stuff?
Yes. Bill, I've written 2 books for Pact. One was on Git, and then we did a book on .NET MAUI, targeted really, I think, at Xamarin Forms programmers who are making the transition to .NET MAUI. And that book is done well. Been very happy with it. I'm now talking to them about starting a book on writing APIs. Pretty much the material that I'm hoping we'll talk about today. Previewing a lot of that on my website, on my blog.
Is that just jesseliberty.com?
jesseliberty.com, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I can actually show you the homepage of that. Oops, left that behind. Okay, there we go. I don't know if you can see my homepage. Yeah, there we go. But here's the new series. Starts off explaining what we're going to do. And then so far there are 4 parts to this. Part 2 explains about the database, and we can talk about this today if you like. And then there's part 3, which talks about Dapper, which is a simple ORM, object relational mapper. And then finally, part 4, if I come down way down here, is creating the APIs. And there are a couple ways to create APIs. We can talk about that. The 2 that I focus on are through ASP Core and GraphQL.
Nice. So you've written books on MAUI, you've written books on web APIs. You're one of the folks that I know that have been doing .NET for a really long time and doing it successfully. So one of the things that I want to ask you before we again start to dive into this topic would be, do you have any tips for folks on how you achieve longevity like in your career in this space for so long? And the reason I ask that is because a lot of folks are like, oh, well, you got to learn JavaScript and you got to switch programming language. You got to learn Rust and Go and da. And nothing wrong with learning different languages. I'm a big proponent of learning new things. but then also too, like being able to see consistency and growth in that consistency, I think is also important too, right? So I'd love to hear what you think about that since you've been here so long.
Right. Well, keeps telling me how long I've been here. I'm feeling older and older.
I'm gonna stop then.
That's all right. I didn't start in .NET. I started in writing in C,
Yeah,
and then when .NET came along, I entered, I think, through ASP.NET, if that makes sense. I think.
yeah. Mhm.
I was doing C and then C++ and got the Microsoft compiler, so I sort of eased my way in. It was easier and beneficial and satisfying to stay in the .NET universe. It's
Mhm.
big. There's a lot of opportunity there to learn new stuff. I agree with you about learning new languages. I think you need to find a balance between being open to learning new stuff on the one hand and getting good at what you're doing and having some proficiency on the other. I've always opted for new stuff.
Yeah,
My feeling was that once you get really good at something, it gets really boring, and so it's time
yeah,
to do something new. I was very lucky when I started programming. Things were a lot simpler, and the environment was simpler. What you were building was simpler, and I spent a lot of time on bleeding edge. But even so, things simplified as you went along. Right now, if you're coming in from scratch, you really have to decide whether you're looking at web applications or desktop/mobile applications.
yeah,
There is some ability to do both at once, but if you're going to do web applications, then you have a whole lot of choices about uh, what world you want to be in and what languages you want to use and what uh, like, do you want to use React? Do you want to use Angular? Do you want to use Vue? I mean, there's a lot of decisions to be made there, and there's a lot of different moving pieces.
yeah.
What I'm working in at the moment, building APIs, is pretty much straight up C#, which is great. It's really enjoying that.
Awesome. So I know, like we said just now, you just wrote a book. Well, recently just published a book on Maui. How did you make that shift over from Maui to web APIs? Because for a lot of us are still trying to do that. And when I say that, a lot of us, like I've been telling myself for years, I'm gonna learn how to do some mobile stuff. I'm gonna learn how to do some desktop stuff, some client facing, pretty pictures and boxes and buttons. But I always end up just sticking to the back end because that's a comfortable space for me. Right. So tell me, how is it that, you went from, okay, well, I'm going to publish this Maui book to now you're working on these projects, building APIs?
Well, for about 7 years, I've been building mobile applications, and almost all of that was in Xamarin.
Mm.
And Maui came out. That was very exciting, and there was a real opportunity there. But the folks I was working with decided that they were going to go native,
Mm.
and that was a real challenge as to whether I wanted to learn Swift or did I want to go somewhere else and continue to work in Maui. And the man who is now my boss's boss, what at Microsoft we used to call a skip boss,
Yeah.
swooped in and said, "How would you like to do some just straight up C# in the back end?" And I had not really done a lot of back end work, so this seemed like a great opportunity.
Nice. Okay. So now you're getting to learn how to build like these APIs. I'd love to hear about your experience and what you're and like what exactly you've been building. But before we do that, we actually have a question. First question coming in from YouTube. This is from the Sim Racers TSR. Where can I purchase your books? Are we talking hardback or digital, or maybe both? I don't know. Like maybe you have both of those.
You can get it on the Kindle. You can also get a paper copy. There are advantages to both. You can buy them presumably at any bookstore, certainly through bookshop.org or through Amazon or directly from the publisher, Pact, P-A-C-K.
PACKT, I think,
I
right?
think
Let
by
me
now I
look.
would know how to spell it. Yeah. So yeah, it should be pretty broadly available. I hope it's broadly available.
Yeah, so it is PACKT. KT.
KT.
So packpub.com. And what I'll do is, for folks that are curious, I'm going to go ahead and pop that up on the screen so folks can see it. So it is Pact, P-A-C-K-T, Pact with a T, pub. And then you can go up and look up, Jesse and his books and, support him by purchasing some of the books, right? And so I'm sure you'll like that very much.
Yes, I give all my money to a college fund that is paying off my kids' college.
Got to support the kids, man. I get it.
Indeed.
Got to support the kids. All right. So why don't we go ahead and dive into the topic, right? Like tell us what you've been doing with web APIs, what you've been building, and what you've been learning like along the way.
Well, the premise of an API is that you have back-end data, and you have a front-end app, which could be a web app, could be a mobile app, and the app wants to get to that data. And rather than the app having to know all about the data structures and how to query the database and so on, you present an API, which is application program interface. It's a basically an encapsulation of what it is you want. So you call this thing and give it the necessary information. It gives you back what you want. So there are a couple different ways of doing that. The most popular probably is using REST. And when you use REST, the advantage here is that you use the standard HTTP calls. So you use get and put and push and post, I should say. And that gives you the CRUD operations, the create, read, update, and delete operations using the standard HTTP verbs. Mm-hmm. The alternative is GraphQL, which I'm just beginning to use. The advantage of GraphQL is that it solves a big problem that REST has, which is overfetching and underfetching. But let's focus on overfetching. If you call, let's say you have a database and it's got 30 fields and you only want 4 of them. Well, we could write an API for just those 4, but then somebody else wants a different 6, and then somebody else wants a different 8. And so what we typically do is just send it all. Well, you wanted 4, you just got 30, and that doesn't really matter if you're only doing 1 or 2, but if you're doing 10,000, that's a lot of data over the wire that you don't necessarily want to send. So with GraphQL, you can say, these are the 4 I want, and get exactly those 4 back.
Got it. Okay. So one of the things that has come up in the past when folks talk about GraphQL is when it comes to filtering properties out from a response, some folks would argue we've had that. We as in .NET folks have had that with OData for a little while. I don't know if you have any experience with OData, but I'd love to hear about your initial feelings about GraphQL in comparison to like other ways of building APIs.
Right. Well, the only thing that I can really compare it to is REST. And REST is very comfortable and very intuitive and very popular. GraphQL is pretty new to me and to the group of people that I'm working with, and we're trying to evaluate how much of the work of learning, of the learning curve, and how much of the work of actually interacting is being pushed to the client, and is that reasonable and is that helpful? Yeah. Because the client needs to take a look at what's called the schema, which tells them everything they can query for, and then they have to construct a query, and then they have to deconstruct what we give them back. And that may all be fine, but it's different from working with REST.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. So then up front, like the consumer of said API just has to have a little bit more information around like, well, what can I get and what are the data types and how do I filter out these queries, right? And et cetera.
Right. I don't want to overstate it. I mean, they still need to know what they want in REST as well. It's just, it's a different approach with GraphQL. You're not using the standard HTTP verbs. You're sending what looks a lot like a JSON block that describes what it is you want. Now in REST, that's also true. In the body of a REST call, you would put in
Yeah.
REST allows you to do a couple of things. It allows you to make your query through the URL or to send what's called a body that has a description of what data parameters you want to send in.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So
Some of
tell
this
us.
is easier to show than to say, and we'll get to
Well,
that.
yeah, I'm sure we'll get to that. Okay. So we talked a little bit about, again, like being able to make calls over HTTP and REST and things of that nature. What types of applications are you building with these APIs that you're working on? I don't know if that's something you could talk about or not, but
Well, I
are
can say
you?
generically, CNH Industrial is actually, we build equipment for farms, nice big tractors and, $500,000 enormous equipment. As part of that, farming these days, I know it's so weird farming, but farming these days has become extremely data intensive.
Yeah.
Farmers want to know how much of this did I put down, how much water came down, what was my yield, different layers, different field types, different field sizes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And to manage a farm, you need a tremendous amount of data. And that data comes from the tractors and gets fed into our central databases. And then the web portal or our phones can manage that data and present that data. And to do that, they need to be able to extract it and to get it from the API. So it's not public facing in a general way. It's really targeted at the people who own the equipment that we sell. And I'm one of these days I'm going to get a ride on a tractor because I'm not a farmer. I grew up in New York.
Got it. Well, you know what? I grew up in the Caribbean. I've never ridden on any farming equipment either. So if you ever get the opportunity, you have to tell me what that's like.
I'll let you know.
Okay.
And then you can tell me about growing up in the Caribbean.
We could share stories. I'm completely down for that. So so when you talk about building APIs, particularly in .NET, more than likely folks are going to be talking about using ASP.NET, and particularly today ASP.NET Core.
Yes.
Right? Now we're talking about either using controllers or using minimal APIs or endpoints or whatever flavor of structure that you particularly type of like.
Right.
I'm curious to hear. Do you have a preference between the style that you use inside of ASP.NET for building APIs, or are you kind of just like, it depends on the situation?
Well, it does depend on the situation, but for any kind of large enterprise application, minimal APIs are just not going to cut it. You need the organizational structure. So we work with controllers, and each controller has a method that acts as an endpoint, and by which I just mean that there's a URL that you can call, and our controllers talk to services that manipulate the business logic, and then that talks to the repository, which is where we get our data from.
Okay.
And it's a little more complicated than that, but that's the essential architecture.
Got it. Okay.
That banging you're hearing is my dog, who's promised me he'll be quiet during this, but we'll see.
I mean, if your dog wants to have a little bit of a guest appearance and say hi, we won't be mad at that at all. So that is totally fine. Cool. Well, I mean, I'd love for us to dive into some code, right, and kind of get a little bit of perspective of what it looks like, particularly for you, like as you're building APIs with .NET. Do you have anything you have to show us?
Yeah, I can. This little fragment of an application is the basis that I'm going to use in my forthcoming book from Packt on APIs.
Okay.
And it's also, I'm using it in my blog to begin to introduce some of these concepts. So the idea is that you have a database of automobiles. Let me bring that up.
Okay.
Okay. So you can see that the fields are the name of the car, so that's the make and model. miles per gallon, cylinders, displacements, all the things that you would expect in a car. And the premise here is that we're mimicking a website that can buy and sell cars, used cars. So you want to be able to make selections based either on just getting everything, or you might want to say select star from car where, I don't know, MPG is greater than 15. I just made that up. Let's hope this actually works. There we go. Oh, what didn't it like? Can I do this? I'm sorry, I never wing it.
No, that's fine.
Doesn't like that. Okay.
What is
let's,
MPG? Is what? Is
It's
that
just miles per gallon. Yeah.
what is it? A number? Is it a?
Yeah, I gotta go look. MPG we can see over here is a VAR card, which is why that didn't work. In fact, all of these are. This is a database that I picked up. It's an open database, and I can get you the credits on where it's from. What we can do is deleted. We can say, show me only the ones that are not deleted. So where is deleted equal false? I think I can say false even though they're zeros. Nope, I gotta say equals 0. Okay.
Is deleted is also a VAR card too?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's kind of weird. That's an interesting database design from
yeah. Normally that would be a Boolean, so that you could do true false. But the idea here is that you want to be able to sort this. You want to be able to access subsets of this. And if you are the client, let's say a website or phone, you want to be able to access this information without having to know what database it's on, where that database is, how that database is organized, and so on. So you would create an API. And the way you would do that, or the way I would do that, is that I would open up Visual Studio and I would start by creating a controller. And in that controller, I would have these endpoints, these methods that are marked with HTTP commands or syntax. So, for example, if I want to get all of the cars, I mark this get, and then I have a method that does that. It's going to return an IEnumerable of car. I'm calling it get all. And then I'm taking a Boolean as to whether I want to return the deleted records. And I call my repository. Now, to keep things simple, I'm not using a service at this point in the development of the application. So I call my repository, say get all, and pass in what I want. And then in my repository, I have a method called get all. And what it's going to do is use Dapper, which is an ORM, much like Entity Framework, only infinitely simpler. And it allows me to build my SQL statement. So I'm saying select star from car, and then I use this syntax, which is Dapper specific, where, and if it's not return deleted records, I say where is deleted equals 0. So that answers the question about how to do that.
So this is kind of interesting, and I'd love for us to like dive into that just a little bit more. So, because I don't think we've had a conversation on, at least on this show, about Dapper. So, like you said, like Dapper is like a, I guess I don't know if we can call it ORM. I don't think we can, but it's like a SQL helper, I guess, to a certain extent. That just makes
it sells itself as an ORM, as an object relational model. Yeah, it does.
Okay, so then it's an ORM then, like a lightweight ORM, I guess, in comparison to Entity Framework. It's not as heavy, but it's like a lighter weight ORM. And so what you're doing here, I'm looking at line 21, is that like I'm guessing Dapper has its own very specific syntax for creating templates.
It does.
So you can have like that star where, right? And I'm guessing that's a placeholder of some sort.
Yes, exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. It uses standard SQL that you would use with SQL Server, but then it adds some things like this where clause that allow you to come down later and add values to that where clause. So, for example, here, notice we have a builder called SQL Builder. So I can say builder where is deleted equals 0, and the effect of that is that I get a statement select star from car where is deleted equals 0. And I can make as many of these where statements as I want, and that allows me to have conditional logic in the building of my select statement.
Got it. Okay. And then, so one of the things I'm curious about, and particularly how the syntax works. So again, if we look at line 21, right, you're initializing SQL template, but then on 24, when you say the where, so you don't have to assign that where clause to SQL template. It just automatically does it for you.
Well,
Does that
notice
make sense?
that yes, it does. What you have, you start with a SQL builder,
Uh-huh.
and then it's the builder that adds this template.
Okay.
And so it's the builder that we add the where clause to. And that builds up what we need to make the entire SQL statement.
Got it.
And then we get our connection and we pass in from that template the SQL. And we also pass in the template's parameters. Now, in this case, we don't have any parameters, but we certainly can. And let me see if I have any that do. I don't think I do at the moment, but you can have variables that you designate with an @ sign, and then you create a little structure that you pass in called parameters, and that
Got it.
it fills those in for you.
Got it. Okay. That's a really interesting syntax. And I've honestly never seen it before, to be honest with you, like that templating syntax that it uses. So I thought that was a little interesting.
Yeah, and it's very convenient.
Okay. So then when, like, within each action method, right, that we have, essentially all you're doing now is you're just, you created that new connection, you generate that template, and then after that, you just, you execute that query using those helper methods, right? So I see like there's a
Right.
query async, right? And, it's generic. So I could see that it's going to, map all of those properties or all of those fields that gets back from the database to the properties attached to that car model.
Exactly. And what you need to do to have that is we need to create a car object with all of its properties. And what I will do moving forward is I'll create a car DTO, and that will allow me to move the data across the wire, choosing what I want out of my model. At the moment, I'm just using the model itself, keeping things very, very simple for the moment.
Got it.
And
Okay.
then once we're ready, we can run this, and then clients can talk to it over just over the web by using URLs. So let's take a quick look at what I mean by that. When I have told it to use Swagger, which is a way to interact with this and also to get documentation for this. And so here it's telling me that I'm in the car's application. It tells me my basic URL to get to this Swagger. And what I care about most is it's telling me the port that this is on. So I'll use that when I use Postman or any of my clients. But we wrote get car, and that's right here. So it tells me that I have these various parameters, and the one that we wrote is the default value of is the return deleted records, which has a default value of false. So do we want to return deleted records? And in order to use this, we're going to say try it out. We'll leave the default value. Down here, it shows me a example of a request and an example of return value. So what we're looking for is 200 in success, and what we're going to send in is just that get/car. So when I hit execute, it's going to send that across the wire, and we should see, and we do, a list of the various cars.
Right.
And notice that I had said false on deleted records. So we go from 3 directly to 5 because 4 is deleted. So if I come up here and I say true, return the deleted records as well and execute. Now we're going to see that 4 is in fact there, and we can see it is deleted is set to 1, that is to say true. I'm not sure where my voice went today.
That's fine.
So is what I'm saying making sense?
Yeah, that makes tons of sense. And this Swagger, this built-in Swagger UI, and built in from the perspective of it comes straight out of the template. So for most folks, when they use .NET New Web API or File New Project in Visual Studio, like some of this stuff is already wired up for you. So it's
Yes.
really helpful to have this interface that you could use to like test your APIs as you're like building them out.
Yes, I will say that most of the time I use Postman, which takes a little bit of setup, but once you do set it up, it makes it very easy to create various requests and then to hold on to those and reuse them. In fact, you can even automate them for testing your endpoints.
Yeah. Okay. So I've used Postman. I think one of the things I like about Postman in general is just the fact that I could store my in Postman they call collections, right? I could store my
Yes.
requests in like these groupings called collections. And now you could source control that, you could pass them around, you could share them with folks. But I think in the latest version of Visual Studio, they do also support the .http file syntax.
Yes.
I've used that more in VS Code. I haven't used it in Visual Studio Code, so I don't know. Well, mainly too because I don't have Windows machines, but I use it mainly in VS Code. But I can imagine you'll be able to do something similar where you could store a collection of these .http files, source control them, share them around, set variables and things of that nature. And now you can kind of, have a way to like pass some of your, I guess, HTTP tests or requests or whatever around.
I think what you're describing is a VS Code feature, but you get everything you're describing in Postman.
Yeah.
And I may be wrong. I'm not sure that Visual Studio itself has what you're describing.
It does have it, but it's a .http file. Right. So Postman doesn't have Postman just has JSON collections.
Right.
Visual Studio Code has a file called .http. So it'll be
okay.
test.http, request that, whatever you want to call it. And then that HTTP file has different, it has different parameters and things of that nature that you could, put in there. I'm actually looking for the documentation for it now so I could show it to folks. But yeah, I mean, it is a thing in the later versions of Visual Studio. And then VS Code has it as well too. So,
Okay. I can show you that in Program CS, which is, you are getting this automatically from ASP Core. One of the things that you're finding here is in the environment, in the development environment, it says use Swagger and use the Swagger UI, and that's how we're getting Swagger to come up during development. And there's a number of things here that set up your interaction and your environment. Now, in this simple example, I don't have authorization. There's a lot I would build out as I build this application, and will build out as I build this application. The first thing I'd like to do is add in DTOs and a stronger service layer, and I'll use Mapper, which is a open source application for mapping from DTOs to database objects and back. And one of the things that I'm aiming at is in my blog post and also in my book is that everything that you need to do this is free. There's absolutely nothing you need to buy to do this work, because this will all work in Visual Studio Community Edition and Dapper and I believe Dapper and AutoMapper are both free to use. Now there may be restrictions on where you can use them. I don't want to speak for them, but I don't know what the licensing is. But I know to get started, you certainly can do all of that for free.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Dapper repo now. It says the Dapper library and tools are licensed under Apache 2. So whatever, I don't know the details of the Apache 2 license, but whatever restrictions Apache 2 has, That's the space that Dapper occupies.
Right. But in any case, you're not spending money on it.
Yeah, no, you're not. You are not. You are not. You are not. You are not.
Dapper is really interesting and worth some time to investigate. It's surprisingly powerful considering how lightweight it is. If that makes any sense, if that's not a contradiction, because you can use it in an extremely simple way, or you can do quite a bit with it. It's not entity framework. It doesn't intend to be entity framework. It's not a replacement for that. It's much lighter weight, as we keep saying.
I think one of the good things about it, like you said, it's because I'm guessing the surface area is a little bit more smaller. Because I don't know if it has things like migrations and all this other stuff that Entity Framework has, but sometimes you don't need that. But then sometimes too, like those additional pieces come with, additional weight, right? And the performance is not as good because there's more layers and things to check that you have to go through, right? And so one of the things I've always heard about Dapper from folks is they love it for the performance and the fact that they could get a lot done in a small amount of time, which I think is important.
Right. I agree with all of that.
Yeah. Okay. So
when I do my podcast, one of the things that I look for is I speak a little bit and then the guest speaks a long time and then I speak, and I'm not giving you that, and I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I'm totally fine jumping in here. All right. So we talked. So we saw how you did your modeling with Dapper. I'd love to hear your thoughts about using stuff like AutoMapper or Mapster or any of those type of mapping tools.
I've used AutoMapper. We use it at my company, and it's just extremely easy to use. You tell it the name of your DTO and the name of your database object, and then you just use Lambda expressions to say from this DTO object to this database object all the way through. And then you at the bottom, you say reverse map, and then it knows how to go the other way as well. So it's pretty straightforward, pretty easy to use. I wish I could show you. I don't have it built out in this application. And of course, the corporate stuff is proprietary, but it is pretty straightforward.
That's fine. So so another reason I asked that question is because I'm sure as you build out like your API tool set, there's probably like a collection of tools that you kind of like to have in that box, right? Like I can see already like Dapper is one of those tools you like to have inside of that box. I'm kind of curious to see, maybe not in this application, but some of the other ones you've built using APIs. What are some of the other tools that you like to kind of have in your tool belt, as you're, working on projects?
Yeah, you would expect that that's a long list. It actually, at least for me, has been pretty small. It's ASP.NET Core, clearly, is the basis. As we said, Dapper and AutoMapper. The other big tool that I use every day, all day, is Postman. And that's sort of the front end substitute. And as you said, you set up your environment, and then there are collections, and you can say, okay, every time I add an API, I make a Postman. What would you call that? A Postman statement, I guess. That
like a request.
That API.
You make a Postman request or
a request? Yes. Yeah. Yes. Although you could do a post, you could do a get, you can do a put to update, and those persist and can be saved and can be put into source control. But now we have a corporate account, and so we all share one set. And so it makes it much, much easier to keep everything up to date and not step on each other's toes. If I add a Postman command, it immediately shows on everybody else's, and that's just luxurious.
Got it. Okay. I know for me, so I used to have a different tool belt, but now with ASP.NET Core, my tool belt's changed a little bit. But one of the things that I've been looking at a lot is what's that tool called? Brighter. So I build a lot of APIs that have to like defer work, right? So, you hit the API, I drop a message in a queue. There's some background processing that happens in another thread or another process or another machine. You know what I mean? And then, I do a lot of like workflow kickoffs and stuff like that. And Brighter is a tool that I actually been playing around with. I'm a big fan of it. Um, it allows you to use like these different queuing systems. You could use Rabbit, you could use an Azure thing, a Google thing, a Microsoft thing, whatever your poison happens to be. And I want to say also just last month, maybe about 2 months ago, we had Drew Sellers. Drew Sellers works on a tool called Mass Transit. Him and Chris Patterson, I believe, they work on Mass Transit, which is also a well-known .NET thing for like doing messaging, right? You could probably tell I spent a lot of my time in like messaging, like, okay, API call, but then now I'm like dropping off the work somewhere so it can get processed and do something else. So those are some of the things that I've been paying a lot of attention to, at least when it comes into that space. I'm also a big tester guy, using things like Fake It Easy. Fake It Easy is my mocking tool of choice. I've been using that for a long time. Using things like AutoFixture is really cool too. And obviously XUnit is another thing that I like to keep in my toolbox as I'm building out APIs and also testing them on the other side too. So yeah, I think from the actual API front end perspective itself, yeah, not a whole ton of stuff, but for some reason when it comes to like testing tools, there's like so much more stuff I have to put in there. Because then I want to run load tests, and I might want to run some stuff with what's that tool called? With Playwright or something else, right? To like test out the UI interactions. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So
we do our unit testing with XUnit, and we have someone who just joined the team who's doing automated testing, and I don't know, frankly, which app she's using to build the automated tests, but the idea will be to be able to run through all of the endpoints, and then as we add more endpoints, make sure that, I mean, it's the same philosophy as unit tests, that every time you change something, you want to make sure you haven't broken something else.
Okay, nice. All right. So another thing you did mention that we haven't dove into yet is authorization and authentication. Now, again, I know you don't have it set up in this app, but like, do you have any, thoughts, feelings, perspectives on like good ways to like secure your API and apply like, security policies and things of that nature to it?
Yes, the number one rule is find somebody who knows what he's doing.
I love it.
Authorization.
Call the security guy. I let the security guy.
Exactly right. Do not try to wing authorization and authentication.
Find the security person. I love it.
That's right. We use a token, and we use an account ID and some other stuff to make sure that that you're only getting what you're authorized to get, and that you've been authenticated as the person you say you are. There's a lot of detail in doing that and doing it well, but I'm a big believer that that's a specialty, that you want somebody who knows that inside and out, which I don't. So okay. I use what I'm told to use, and I make sure that I'm towing that line, because the last thing you want is for somebody to corrupt your data or access your data or
mess it up.
And of course, there are backups and all of that you're going to want to put in, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. I think security is a scary thing in general. And the last thing a developer wants to do is to get security wrong, because that's not a cheap mistake to resolve, right? Like there's a lot of like cascading effects that you can have with that. Yeah, I remember once I used to play around with like Identity Server / Duende Identity Server. And I think those guys have done a really good job at like putting in those pieces if you need that. I've also just used the built-in ASP.NET identity bits, which are actually just pretty. It's not as hard as people think it is, to be honest with you. Like it has this perception of being hard. It's really not that hard if you spend a little bit of time into it. But those have been the two things that I've used. But I know there's tons of other options that folks have used, Keycloak and OpenDICT and some of these other ones as well. But I really don't have any experience with those. I don't know what those look like. And I haven't used any of the cloud ones either, other than Auth0.
I'm going to flip this around and just have you come and talk about APIs on my podcast. You've investigated a whole lot of options there.
We could switch. You know what? If anytime you want me or any of my other co-hosts to come on and talk about stuff, let us know. We'll be more than happy to do that.
That would be great. That
Anytime.
would be great.
Actually, Alon, one of my co-hosts, she is in the chat. Hi, Alon. Say hi to everybody. So there you go. We just gave you work to do. Since you're not here on stream, you're gonna have to show up on one of Jesse's shows and present. So there you go.
Yep.
Okay.
So I get to pitch where that is. It's at jesseliberty.com/podcast. And my podcast is called Yet Another Podcast. Creative naming.
So jesseliberty.com. And then once we're on there, it's just /podcasts, like off the end of the URL. Right. Okay. Awesome. And I'm guessing folks could get your podcasts everywhere they get podcasts. So Apple, Google, Stitcher,
wherever you get your podcast.
Wherever you get your podcast from, you could get them from there. So okay.
Yes. It's called Yet Another Podcast. And it's very focused on .NET. And we've been very lucky with who we got. I'm right now editing a great conversation I had with the chief designer of C#, Mads Torgerson. Great, truly great man, great guy. And so we've been pretty lucky with that. For a long while, it was focused on .NET MAUI. We're broadening that now, as you might imagine.
Sure. So we got to make sure that we get everyone to subscribe to that. And whenever you put out that next episode with Mads, like we'll be paying attention to that too. Maybe we'll share with our folks here as one of our community highlights too. So we'll make sure we do that as well.
That would be great.
Cool. Well, Jesse, I think we're rolling down to the end a little bit. Do you have any last words, suggestions? You know what I mean? Any advice you'd love to share with our audience about like building your team?
The only advice I have is that I avoided back-end work for a long time. I saw myself as a front-end guy. And, back-end development is got its own interesting niche, its own interesting set of challenges. I'm really happy to have made that change. Not necessarily for the rest of my life, but right now I find it very exciting, very interesting. And I'm not moving pixels around, which is kind of a relief for a while. So, my advice is to be open to working at various parts of the full stack, and to keep learning and keep plugging away and keep going on podcasts.
I'm a big fan of that. Awesome. Well, Jesse, thank you again so much for coming on. We really appreciate you. And thank all of you that are still here that have been watching. Obviously, if you ever want to reach out to Jesse, I'm pretty sure you're on LinkedIn and all the social things.
All except X, yes.
Except X. So Mastodon, Blue Sky, etc.
Well, plus people can just send me email if they want. It's jesseliberty@gmail.com.
jesseliberty@gmail.com, right? No I in Jesse. I did make that mistake once. I will try not to do it again. But JESSE, no I. There's no I in Jesse's name. jesseliberty@gmail.com. And feel free to ask some questions, or maybe you have a podcast. He'll come on your podcast too if you're nice to him. So again, thank you all so much. Thank you, Jesse, for being on, and thank you all for watching. This has been another episode of Inside.net. We learned about creating web APIs with .NET. If you have any suggestions for any future shows you'd love to see us do, leave a comment, or feel free to reach out to any of us on social media. I will be more than happy to try and make that work out. All right, folks. Well, take care, and thank you all so much. And see you next time.